Hello, hello. I am so excited to start our quarter two read aloud with you today. We are going to be reading Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. It is a story of his childhood that took place in South Africa. I am so excited to share this story with you. So, the dedication in the book says, "For my mother, my first fan, thank you for making me a man." So, we're going to start in part one. And he does a really good job of explaining apartheid. Apartheid, the South African government policy of racial segregation, was genius at convincing people who were the overwhelming majority to turn on each other. Hate is what it was. You separate people into groups and make them hate one another so you can control them. During the years of apartheid, Black South Africans outnumbered white South Africans nearly 5-1. Yet we were divided into different tribes with different languages: Zulu, Xhosa, Tswana, Sotho, Venda, Nimgibli, Tsonga, Pidi, and more. Long before apartheid existed, these tribal factions clashed and warred with one another. Then white rule used that animosity to divide and conquer. All non-whites were systematically classified into various groups and subgroups. Then these groups were given differing levels of rights and privileges to keep them at odds. Perhaps the starkest of these divisions was between South Africa's two dominant groups, the Zulu and the Xhosa. The Zulu man is known as the warrior. He is proud. He puts his head down and fights. When the colonial armies invaded, the Zulu charged into battle with nothing but spears and shields against men with guns. The Zulu were slaughtered by the thousands, but they never stopped fighting. The Xhosa, on the other hand, pride themselves on being the thinkers. My mother is Xhosa. Nelson Mandela, the anti-apartheid revolutionary who was imprisoned for 27 years and who eventually became South Africa's first Black president, was Xhosa. The Xhosa waged a long war against the white man as well. But after experiencing the futility of battle against a better armed foe, many Xhosa chiefs took a more nimble approach. "These white people are here whether we like it or not," they said. "Let's see what tools they possess that can be useful to us. Instead of being resistant to English, let's learn English. We'll understand what the white man is saying, and we can force him to negotiate with us." The Zulu went to war with the white man. The Xhosa played chess with the white man. And for a long time, neither was particularly successful, and each blamed the other for a problem neither had created. Bitterness festered. For decades, those feelings were held in check by a common enemy. The apartheid fell, Mandela walked free, and Black South Africa went to war with itself. So chapter 1, it's called Run. I was 9 years old when my mother threw me out of a moving car. It happened on a Sunday. I know it was on a Sunday because we were coming home from church, and every Sunday in my childhood meant church. We never missed church. My mother was and still is a deeply religious woman, very Christian. Like indigenous peoples around the world, Black South Africans adopted the religion of our colonizers. By adopt, I mean it was forced on us. My childhood involved church or some form of church at least 4 nights a week. Tuesday night was the prayer meeting. Wednesday night was Bible study. Thursday night was youth church. Friday and Saturday we had off. Then on Sunday, we went to church. 3 churches to be precise. The reason we went to 3 churches was because my mom said each church gave her something different. The first church offered by jubilant praise of the Lord. The second church offered deep analysis of the scripture, which my mom loved. The third church offered passion and catharsis. It was a place where you truly felt the presence of the Holy Spirit inside you. Completely by coincidence, as we moved back and forth between these churches, I noticed that each one had its own distinct racial makeup. Jubilant church was mixed church. Analytical church was white church. And passionate cathartic church, that was Black church. Mixed church was Rhema Bible Church. Rhema was one of those huge, super modern suburban mega churches. The pastor, Ray McCauley, was an ex-bodybuilder with a big smile and the personality of a cheerleader. Pastor Ray competed in the 1974 Mr. Universe competition. He placed 3rd. The winner that year was Arnold Schwarzenegger. Every week, Ray would be up on stage working really hard to make Jesus cool. There was arena-style seating and rock band jamming with the latest Christian contemporary pop. Everyone sang along, and if you didn't know the words, that was okay, because they were all right up there on the Jumbotron for you. It was Christian karaoke, basically. I always had a blast at mixed church. White church was Rosebank Union in Sandton, a very white and wealthy part of Johannesburg. I loved white church because I didn't actually have to go to the main service. My mom would go to that, and I would go to the youth side to Sunday school. In Sunday school, we got to read cool stories. Noah and the flood was obviously a favorite. I had a personal stake there. But I also loved the stories about Moses parting the Red Sea, David slaying Goliath, Jesus whipping the money changers in the temple. I grew up in a home with very little exposure to popular culture. My mom didn't want my mind polluted by sex and violence. The only music I really knew was from church, soaring, uplifting songs praising Jesus. It was the same with movies. The Bible was my action movie. Samson was my superhero. He was my He-Man, a guy beating 1,000 people to death with the jawbone of a donkey. That's pretty fierce. Eventually, you get to Paul writing letters to the Ephesians, and it loses the plot. But the Old Testament and the Gospels, I could quote you anything from those pages, chapter and verse. There were Bible games and quizzes every week at White Church, and I always trounced everyone. Then there was Black Church. There was always some kind of Black church service going on somewhere, and we tried them all. In the township, that typically meant an outdoor tent revival style church. We usually went to my grandmother's church, an old school Methodist congregation, 500 African grannies in blue and white blouses clutching their Bibles and patiently burning in the hot African sun. Black church was rough. No air conditioning, no lyrics up on jumbotrons, and it lasted forever. 3 or 4 hours at least, which confused me because white church was only like an hour, in and out, thanks for coming. But at Black church, I would sit there for what felt like an eternity, trying to figure out why time moved so slowly. I eventually decided Black people needed more time with Jesus because Black church had one saving grace. If I could make it to the 3rd or 4th hour, I'd get to watch the pastor cast demons out of people. People possessed by demons would start running up and down the aisles like madmen, screaming in tongues. The ushers would tackle them like bouncers at a club and hold them down. The pastor would grab their heads and violently shake them back and forth, shouting, "I cast out this spirit in the name of Jesus." Some pastors were more violent than others, but what they all had in common was that they wouldn't stop until the demon was gone and the congregation had gone limp and collapsed on stage. The person had to fall, because if he didn't fall, that meant the demon was powerful and the pastor needed to come to him even harder. You could be a linebacker in the NFL. Didn't matter. That pastor was taking you down. Good Lord, that was fun. Christian karaoke, fierce action stories, and violent faith healers. Man, I loved church. The thing I didn't love was the lengths we had to go to in order to get to church. It was an epic slog. We lived in Eden Park, a tiny suburb way outside Johannesburg. It took us an hour to get to White Church, another 45 minutes to get to Mixed Church, and another 45 minutes to drive out to Soweto for Black Church. Then, if that wasn't bad enough, some Sundays we'd drive back to White Church for special evening service. By the time we finally got home at night, I'd just collapse into bed. This particular Sunday, the Sunday I was hurled from a moving car, started out like any other Sunday. My mother woke me up and made me porridge for breakfast. I took my bath while she dressed my baby brother, Andrew, who was 9 months old. Then we went out to the driveway, but once we were all strapped in and ready to go, the car wouldn't start. My mom had this ancient, broken down, bright tangerine Volkswagen Beetle that she picked up for next to nothing, and it was already breaking down. To this day, I hate secondhand cars. I'll take a new car with the warranty every time. As much as I love church, taking public transport meant the slog would be twice as long and twice as hard. When the Volkswagen refused to start, I was praying, please say we'll just stay home. Please say we'll just stay home. Then I glanced over to see the determined look on my mother's face. Her jaw set, and I knew I had a long day ahead of me. Come, she said, we're going to catch minibuses. My mother is as stubborn as she is religious. Once her mind's made up, that's it. It's the devil, she said about the stalled car. The devil doesn't want us to go to church. That's why we've got to catch the minibuses. Whenever I found myself up against my mother's faith-based obstinacy, I would try as respectfully as possible to counter with an opposing point of view. Or, I said, the Lord knows that today we shouldn't go to church, which is why he made sure the car wouldn't start, so that we stay at home as a family and take a day of rest because even the Lord rested. Ah, that's the devil talking, Trevor. No, because Jesus is in control. And if Jesus is in control and we pray to Jesus, he would let the car start. But he hasn't. Therefore, no, Trevor. Sometimes Jesus puts obstacles in your way to see if you can overcome them. Like Job. This could be a test. Ah, yes, Mom. But the test could be to see if we're willing to accept what has happened and stay home and praise Jesus for his wisdom. No, that's the devil talking. But Mom, Trevor, Sonkila. Sonkila is a phrase with many shades of meaning. It says, don't undermine me, don't underestimate me, and just try me. It's a command and a threat all at once. It's a common thing for Exosa parents to say to their kids. Anytime I heard it, I knew it meant the conversation was over. And if I uttered another word, I was in for a hiding. At the time, I attended a private Catholic school called Maryvale College. I was the champion of the Maryvale Sports Day every single year, and my mother won the mom's trophy every single year. Why? Because she was always chasing me to give me a hiding, and I was always running not to get the hiding. Nobody ran like me and my mom. We had a very Tom and Jerry relationship. She was the strict disciplinarian. I was incorrigibly naughty. She would send me out to buy groceries, and I wouldn't come right home because I'd be using the change from the milk and bread to play arcade games at the supermarket. I loved video games. I was a master at Street Fighter. I could go forever on a single play. I'd drop a coin in, time would fly, and the next thing I knew, there'd be a woman behind me with a belt. It was a race. I'd take off out the door and through the dusty streets of Eden Park, clambering over walls, ducking through backyards. It was a normal thing in our neighborhood. Everybody knew that Trevor Child would come charging through and his mom would be right there behind him. She could go at a full sprint in high heels, but if she really wanted to come after me, she'd do this weird move with her ankles and the heels would go flying and she wouldn't even miss a step. That's when I knew, okay, she's in turbo mode now. When I was little, she always caught me. But as I got older, I got faster. And when speed failed her, she'd use her wits. If I was about to get away, she'd yell, "Stop, thief!" knowing it would bring the whole neighborhood out against me. Then I'd have strangers trying to grab and tackle me, and I'd have to duck and dive and dodge them as well, all while screaming, "I'm not a thief, I'm her son." The last thing I wanted to do that Sunday morning was climb into some crowded minibus, but the second I heard my mom say Sunkila, I knew my fate was sealed. She gathered up Andrew and we climbed out of the Volkswagen and went out to try and catch a ride. I was 5 years old, nearly 6, when Nelson Mandela was released from prison. I remember seeing it on TV and everyone being happy. I didn't know why we were happy, just that we were. I was aware of the fact that there was a thing called apartheid and it was ending, and that was a big deal, but I didn't understand the intricacies of it. What I do remember, what I will never forget, is the violence that followed. The triumph of democracy over apartheid is sometimes called the bloodless revolution. It's called that because very little white blood was spilled. Black blood ran in the streets. As the apartheid regime fell, we knew that the black man was now going to rule. The question was, which black man? Spades of violence broke out between the Inkatha Freedom Party and the ANC, the African National Congress, as they jockeyed for power. The political dynamic between these two groups was very complicated, but the simplest way to understand it as a proxy war between Zulu and Xhosa. The Inkatha was predominantly Zulu, very militant and very nationalistic. The ANC encompassed many different tribes, but its leaders at the time were primarily Xhosa. Instead of uniting for peace, they turned on one another, committing acts of unbelievable savagery. Massive riots broke out in the evenings. My mom and I would turn on our little black and white TV and watch the news. A dozen people killed, 50 people killed, 100 people killed. Ultimately, thousands of people died. Eden Park sat not far from the sprawling townships in the Eastern Rand. Thokoza and Catalhong, which were the sites of some of the most horrific Inkatha and ANC clashes. Once a month, at least, we'd drive home and the neighborhood would be on fire. Hundreds of rioters in the streets. My mom would edge the car slowly through the crowds and around blockades made of flaming tires. Nothing burns like a tire. It rages with a fury you can't imagine. Whenever the riots broke out, all our neighbors would wisely hole up behind closed doors, but not my mom. She'd head straight out, and as we'd inch our way past the blockade, she'd give the rioters this look: "Let me pass, I'm not involved in this chaos." She was unwavering in the face of danger. That always amazed me. It didn't matter that there was a war on our doorstep. She had things to do, places to be. It was the same stubbornness that kept her going to church despite a broken down car. That careless Sunday, we made our circuit of churches, ending up at a white church. When we walked out of Rosebank Union, it was dark and we were alone. It had been an endless day of minibuses and I was exhausted. It was 9 o'clock at least in those days. With all the violence and riots going on, you did not want to be out that late at night. We were standing at the corner of Jellicoe Avenue and Oxford Road, right in the heart of Johannesburg's wealthy white suburbia, and there were no minibuses. The streets were empty. I so badly wanted to turn to my mom and say, "You see, this is why God wanted us to stay home." But one look at the expression on her face, and I knew better than to speak. We waited and waited for a minibus to come by. Under apartheid, the government provided no public transportation for blacks, but white people still needed us to show up to mop their floors and clean their bathrooms. Necessity being the mother of invention, black people created their own transit system, an informal network of bus routes controlled by private associations operating entirely outside the law. Different groups ran different routes. They would fight over who controlled what. There was bribery and general shadiness that went on a great deal of violence, and a lot of protection money paid to avoid violence. The one thing you didn't do was steal a route from a rival group. Drivers who stole routes would get killed. Being unregulated, minibuses were also very unreliable. When they came, they came. When they didn't, they didn't. Standing outside Rose Bank Union, I was literally falling asleep on my feet. Not a minibus in sight. Eventually, my mother said, "Let's hitchhike." We walked, and after what felt like an eternity, a car drove up and stopped. The driver offered us a ride, and we climbed in. We hadn't gone 10 feet when suddenly a minibus swerved right in front of the car and cut us off. A Zulu driver got out with an Owisia, a large traditional Zulu weapon, a war club basically. It's used to smash people's skulls in. Another guy, his crony, got out of the passenger side. They walked up to the driver's side of the car we were in, grabbed the man who'd offered us a ride, pulled him out, and started shoving their clubs in his face. "Why are you stealing our customers? Why are you picking people up?" It looked like they were going to kill this guy. I knew that happened sometimes. My mom spoke up. "Hey, listen, he was just helping us. Leave him. We'll ride with you." That's what we wanted in the first place. So we got out of the first car and climbed into the minibus. We were the only passengers in the minibus. In addition to being violent gangsters, South African minibus drivers are notorious for complaining and haranguing passengers as they drive. The driver was a particularly angry one as we rode along. He started lecturing my mother about being in a car with a man who was not her husband. My mother didn't suffer lectures from strange men. She told him to mind his own business, and when he heard her speaking in Xhosa, that really set him off. The stereotypes of Zulu and Xhosa women were as ingrained as those of men. Zulu women were well-behaved and dutiful. Xhosa women were immoral and unfaithful. And here was my mother, his tribal enemy, Xhosa woman, alone with 2 small children, one of them a mixed child, no less. "Oh, you're an Xhosa," he said. "That explains it, disgusting woman. Tonight you are going to learn your lesson." He sped off. He was driving fast and he wasn't stopping, only slowing down to check for traffic at intersections before speeding through. Death was never far away from anybody back then. My mother could be harmed. We could be killed. These were all viable outcomes, but I didn't fully comprehend the danger we were in. I was so tired that I just wanted to sleep. Plus, my mom stayed very calm. She didn't panic, so I didn't know how to panic. She just kept trying to reason with him. "I'm sorry if we've upset you, Buhuti. You can just let us out here." "No, really, it's fine. We can just walk." "No." He raced along Oxford Road, the lanes empty, no other cars out. I was sitting closest to the minibus's sliding door. My mother sat next to me holding baby Andrew. She looked out the window at the passing road and then leaned over to me and whispered, "Trevor, when he slows down at the next intersection, I'm going to open the door and we're going to jump." I didn't hear a word of what she was saying because at that point I completely nodded off. When we came to the next traffic light, the driver eased off the gas to look around and check the road. My mother reached over, pulled the sliding door open, grabbed me, and threw me out as far as she could. Then she took Andrew and leapt out behind me. It felt like a dream until the pain hit. Bam! I smacked hard on the pavement. My mother landed right beside me, and we tumbled and rolled and rolled. I was wide awake now. Eventually, I came to a stop and pulled myself up, completely disoriented. I looked around and saw my mother already on her feet. She turned and looked at me and screamed, "Run!" So I ran, and she ran, and nobody ran like me and my mom. It's weird to explain, but I just knew what to do. It was an animal instinct, learned in a world where violence was always lurking and waiting to erupt. In the townships, when the police came swooping in with their riot gear in armored cars and helicopters, I knew run for cover, run and hide. I knew that as a 5-year-old. So, like the gazelles run from the lion, I ran. The men stopped the minibus, got out, and tried to chase us, but they didn't stand a chance. We smoked them. I think they were in shock. I still remember glancing back and seeing them give up with a look of utter bewilderment on their faces. They didn't know they were dealing with the reigning champs of the Maryvale College Sports Day. We kept going until we made it to a 24-hour petrol station and called the police. By then, the men were long gone. I still didn't know why any of this had happened. I'd been running on pure adrenaline. Once we stopped, I realized how much pain I was in. I looked down and the skin on my arms was scraped and torn. I was cut up and bleeding all over. Mom was too. My baby brother was fine, though, incredibly. My mom had wrapped herself around him, and he'd come through it without a scratch. I turned to her in shock. What was that? Why are we running? What do you mean, why are we running? Those men were trying to kill us. You never told me that. You just threw me out of the car. I did tell you. Why didn't you jump? Jump? I was asleep. So I should have left you there for them to kill you? At least they would have woken me up before they killed me. Back and forth we went. I was too confused and too angry about getting thrown out of the car to realize what had happened. My mother had saved my life. As we caught our breath and waited for the police to come and drive us home, she said, "Well, at least we're safe. Thank God." I wasn't going to keep quiet this time. "Look, Mom," I said, "I know you love Jesus, but maybe next week you could ask him to meet us at our house because this really wasn't a fun night." She broke out in a huge smile and started laughing. I started laughing too, and we stood there, this little boy and his mom, our arms and legs covered in blood and dirt, laughing together in the light of a petrol station on the side of the road in the middle of the night. So that was chapter 1. How crazy is that? He was thrown out of a moving car by his mom to save his life. Well, until next time, I hope you enjoyed it.